Hello, my name is Jessie Quack, and I am the editor of the Crooked series of sci-fi crime anthologies. I'll tell you a little bit more about that after the reading, but right now I want to introduce Andrew Sweet. Andrew explores the why of how societies work through the what if of science fiction. He loves science and possibility. He maintains a personal 5-year project on cellular automata that has evolved into a CLI and an infinitely scalable, hardware limited, of course, CA platform as he continues his obsessive research for cellular automata that can perform simple math functions. Former lead guitarist for the grunge punk band Permanent Ascent, Andrew has been involved in music for as long as he's been writing. Now proud owner of a Takamine, Andrew has traded his rapid punk chops for chaotic jazz riffs. Finally, but definitely not last, Andrew's reason for living are his wife and children in their home in Portland, Oregon. Take it away, Andrew.
All right, hi, I'm Andrew Sweet. I'm going to be reading from my latest um, Southern Highlands, the Obi of Mars. It's a standalone that happens in the same universe as Models and Citizens, which is the series starter for the Reality Gradient series. So I hope you enjoy. I'm starting from chapter 4. April has been en route to Mars for some time, along with her assistant slash associate Jeremiah, and they are just now arriving, and April is about to discover that the situation on Mars isn't exactly what she thought it would be. So, Chapter 4, A Zigo and Martian Snakebite. April didn't know how disappointed she would be until the traveler arrived at Mars, seamlessly transitioning the forward momentum of the craft into orbit around the planet before matching speeds with her sister docking station. In a flair for the dramatic, the Mars occupants named everything, so that the docking station there was called the Stone Embarcadero, whereas on Earth hers has simply been Docking Station 19U. They'd burned through Jeremiah's supply of sake about halfway through the trip, so April found herself unpleasantly alert and awake for the departure from her cabin. She stopped to await Jeremiah outside of his room, trying not to be alarmed at the pounding and thud she heard on the other side of his door. After 3 seconds of noise, his room silenced, and the door slid open partly to expose Jeremiah, a sea bag over his shoulder and a thin sheen of perspiration across his forehead. "What on earth are you doing in there?" April asked. "Don't you mean on Mars?" He asked the question with a wide grin. "Wherever? What was all that noise?" "I brought a transportable replicator and some protein packets. The lack of gravity made packets expand a bit, and it was harder to get them back in the bag than it had been to take them out." "They do have food replicators on Mars, Jer." He nodded. "They do. Their protein is all algae-based, though. If you want the good stuff, you have to bring it with you. Have you ever had steak with algae-based proteins?" She shook her head. Not being a big steak eater, though, she doubted she would even notice the difference between the manufactured and expensive lab-grown animal proteins and the algae-based proteins that grew in tanks buried deep beneath the surface of Mars. The passageways had become second nature to them after a month of flight, so that neither had to think too deeply about where to go to disembark. April led just because she was used to doing so. April's first disappointment came in the form of the man who stood between them and the taxi bay, full of Volentre and Volentre buses waiting to take them down to the surface. The flying vehicles looked almost exactly like street buses thanks to the distributed ion engines that allowed them to float no matter their awkward oblong shapes. Past the men's short, stocky build, she saw the handful of other passengers whose names she hadn't bothered to learn any more than she'd had the self-proclaimed archaeologists. The gangly woman with the long, slender dress and the tall man with the bald spot seemed vaguely interesting, but April's singular focus on her mission prevented the distraction. She couldn't let the secret of her visit slip out, so the best bet was complete disassociation. "Ma'am?" A man in a green uniform had moved from assisting the other passengers to now extending his services to the two of them. "Yes?" "Miss April Sallow?" Her face went hot with the implications of his address. Her name wasn't in the flight manifest, as her captain had assured her. She scanned the crowd for the captain, aiming a targeted glare, but he was nowhere to be seen. He hadn't bothered to escort any of the passengers down. "Miss Sallow, if you have a call, if you'd follow me." Without waiting, he spun quickly and stepped toward the interior of the ship, in the exact opposite direction than where she wanted to go. "I'd prefer to disembark now." She laid the words out without moving her feet, causing the man to stop with his brisk pace. He shook his head as he turned to face her. Sorry, ma'am. We've been asked to keep you here for now. Will you please allow me to escort you to the comlink? April shot a glance at Jeremiah, who seemed as confused as she was, and shrugged his shoulders, motioning after the man with his eyes. Fine, she said, and followed as the man resumed his pace. In the process, the trio retraced the same path that she and Jeremiah had taken to get to the docking bay. Over her shoulder, she heard the whine of the distributed ion drive spinning up as the Valentria lifted off, and she bit her lip to counter the frustration. About halfway back to the ship, they branched off into a room that was hidden behind a statue of the founder of United Africa, Trisha Kieta. The woman's statue was a head taller than an actual human, and her eyes stared out through the portal opposite her, down to the rim of the planet. April's eyes followed it to see the red-brown surface of the Martian horizon line sloping on the other side of the aluminum silicate glass. She hadn't noticed the escort stopping before her until he spoke. Without Induna Keta, there would be no Mars. She was the first to actually put resources behind the terraforming effort, despite the fact that the undertaking would not finish until multiple generations later. Her foresight made all of this possible. She was a visionary, April said, and she meant it. Induna Keta had always been one of the stars in her sky against which she could model her life, however imperfectly. Through this entryway, the man said, resuming his pace and turning quickly through the doorway. When April passed through, she sucked in her breath and rolled her tongue across the insides of her teeth. Officer Sallow, the man croaked out from a voice box that seemed to need oil. Honorable Induna Bunki, she replied, recognizing the man's rust-colored and mottled complexion and sagging jowls. Twice in the same month. She felt her muscles immediately stiffen and her jaw lock into place as she recalled the end of their last conversation. You must leave, the man said. Immediately. The last of the warlords has fallen. I heard Hesperia was lost to Lu. The image shook his head, and the brown cloak shuddered as he did so. No, Tharsis Mons has fallen. There's only one ruler on Mars now. Don't leave the ship, April. It's not safe, especially for you. That was easy to say, but less easy to do. At every port of entry, the ships were cataloged top to bottom via inspectors, including crew quarters. Thanks to this very call, she was trapped aboard a space station during customs inspection. So very soon, Liu would know of her presence, whether she wanted him to or not. With Jean having finished overthrowing Tharsis, she couldn't even begin to guess what the next move might be. I'll be fine, Induna, she assured him. This could be good for us. I may be able to get the company exclusive rights to everything on the planet. I'm afraid that you don't fully understand what's happened, he clarified. Enze, Liu, has declared Martian independence. Independence? The figure nodded. Liu is now the self-declared first Enze of Mars, specifically first Enze of the new empire of Alkebulan. She laughed at the thought of the immature boyish Liu Zhen running a Zephyr team, let alone an entire planet. Enze? Alkebulan? He can't be Alkebulan? He can't be serious. April stopped as she saw that Bunky didn't share her mirth. April cleared her throat and tried to disguise the laughter as a strangled cough. Enze was an honorific word for king in the ancient language of the African people. Alkebulan was the name they had given a millennia before to the African continent before the 500-year Dark Ages that came to a close only with the establishment of the Induna first between South Africa, Nigeria, and Sudan before spreading to include the other nation states. Liu Zhen, for better or worse, was establishing himself as a Martian native, solely answerable to the people of the planet. Is anyone recognizing the new government? She asked. After rising through bloodshed? No, not yet, but the United States seems like they might, and possibly the Asian alliance. The dominant world superpower in the world was widely understood to be Africa. Without Africa, Liu could have all the recognition he wanted, but his new nation would forever remain on the fringes of interstellar trade. Africa? I have recommended against it, but we need the rhodium, April. I don't know that we will have a choice but to recognize Alkebulan at present. At present? United Africa are a patient people, April, but our livelihoods depend on that. We're not going to be taken advantage of. If we feel threatened, then Induna Buki, let me reach him first. Maybe I can sway him. Stay on the ship, April. We're already negotiating via Ansible. She scowled at him. I'm here, Honorable Ubunki. I may as well talk to him. No, it was a command now. And though he couldn't technically give them, he held power that could keep her from working in United Africa for the rest of her life. No matter how much he acted as though their relationship was more amicable, as long as he held all the power, they would never be equals. She bowed her head in acquiescence. For the glory of Africa, she said in the traditional greeting. For the glory of Africa, the man responded and then vanished. Enze? The span of the conversation had captured April's attention so much that she'd completely forgotten about her second. Jeremiah had been just outside the range of Nduna Bunki's display. He'd been within hearing distance of the entire conversation. She turned to see his eyes, furrowed up into a worried stare. Might as well have called himself Nduna for what it's worth, she said. Imperialist Mars? There hasn't been a legitimate autocratic regime in what, 2 centuries? More than that, you were thinking of the moon colonies, and they weren't autocratic. However, they might have seemed so. The last of the autocrats were the Action Society, and they tried to unite the globe in the late 21st century, except for maybe the short reign of the Liberty after the Virtual Wars. Those reminders sent chills down April's back. Both the Action Society and Liberty had cost civilization too many lives to count. But he can't possibly expect to beat the African fleet, can he? I don't think so. But unless Africa acts quickly, he may hammer out legitimacy in the eyes of the world to prevent even Africa from taking unilateral action. That would cinch up recognition pretty fast, whatever Nduna Bunki says. We have to get down there. Do we? The ship will be departing soon for Earth. This problem has grown beyond the scope of both of our jobs. What difference would it make for us? April had already stepped back from the tiny room and into the passageway of the station. Her sea bag, just like Jeremiah's, was slung over her arm and knocked her off balance when she tried to turn too quickly. A maneuver she quickly corrected before setting her rapid pace back towards the shuttle to the surface. April, Jeremiah told her in an inquisitive whisper. She ignored him and kept walking. April! She stopped and turned to look at him. What? She asked, feeling the anger rise behind her eyes as her heart rate increased and tension concentrated itself between her temples. Think about what we're doing. Even if you knew Liu Jin before, that doesn't mean he's the same person he was. He may not listen, or worse, he may decide that you're an Nduna spy and have you killed. Her anger tried to redirect itself to the man who now stood between her and laying into Liu with every fiber of hostility she felt growing inside. Before she'd act on it, Jeremiah's face broke back into that easy smile he always had, and she saw that he was right. A lone tear escaped down her cheek, and her shoulders sagged in defeat. You're right, she confirmed. Besides, we know nothing about what to expect when we get down there. What does the structure of Jen's new government even look like? Did he bother with structure at all, or is it just him? As she said it, she was certain that Jen had at least formed a council of some sort. He had once loathed hard work, and most of the running a government that she thought he would likely hand off to others. But Jeremiah was right. She didn't really know the man anymore. And the mental image that she had always had of him was that day when he tried to entice her into a threesome with a friend of hers, who he'd just been shacking up with behind her back. She hoped, given the power he'd amassed and the situation he put himself in, and half the world into, that at least that person had changed enough to believe in some sort of loyalty. Back to the ship, then? She asked the question as Jeremiah unslung his heavy sea bag with a huff and slammed it into the deck. I think so. Let's leave this mess to the Nduna. We aren't equipped. Company's fleet doesn't have space-to-ground munitions, remember? I'm pretty sure that if we go down there right now, it's going to be a one-way trip. She nodded, her curls swung before her eyes. Okay, you're right. This time, I'll go back under one condition. And name it, Chief. You pull out that hidden stash of sake that we both know you've still got, and we get shit-faced and play a Zigo Prem. You got it, he said, grin widening into laughter. How do you know about the backup stash? It's you, Jerry. You always have something. I was going to trade it for a bottle of Martian snakebite, but it seems that we won't be finding it anytime soon. In 30 minutes, they'd redeposited their bags, and she joined Jeremiah in his room. The Seagull board was already set up by the time she arrived, and 2 wooden cups were half full of his backup GSL. He'd unfastened and pulled his rack from the bunk, and had laid the playing board across it. The seats had already been placed for it in the starting wells. Your move, he said, from where he reclined on the ground on one side of the bench. In a rapid movement, she collapsed down beside him, still biting back her anger at Jin, as though his life somehow still reflected on her. Jin's was a stupid move. Playing at Warlord was a lot different than playing at Emperor, and she didn't believe for a moment that he was up to the challenge. And worse, what must this make her look like in Induna Obunki's eyes? He must have questioned her judgment he must have questioned her judgment more the worse Jin behaved for ever having been involved in the man with the first place. You won't win like that, Jeremiah said. Like what? Thinking about Liu Zhen. That obvious? It is. Don't you have any shitty old relationships that ruin your day sometimes? He laughed. I do, all the time. But you see my smile, right? You have to let it go, or it'll eat you alive. I'll stop there. So thanks for your time. This has been Andrew Sweet. I was reading from Southern Highlands, Obi of Mars. This is a standalone that you can get right now at Amazon and all places ebooks are sold, really. All right, thanks.
Hi, welcome back. I promised I'd tell you a little bit more about Crooked, my sci-fi crime anthology series. So the thing that sets this series apart is that it is exclusively focused on stories that are part of a larger universe. So if you came to this looking for a great story from one of your favorite authors, then you will hopefully find other stories in a similar genre. And if you like that story, you can go on to read other works by that author that are set in the same universe. The idea is essentially to be a sampler platter to introduce you to other authors that you might enjoy. So if you liked this reading, go check out the notes below and support the author. You'll find links to go buy Crooked as well, so you can find other authors that you might enjoy, and be sure to check out the other readings in this series as well. All right, thank you so much.